Alright, in today's video I'm going to be doing the rotors and the pads on the brakes on this 2018 Toyota Tacoma. We're using the powerstop kit. I actually got the full kit front and back, but for today we're just going to do the front brakes, and I'll probably do a video on the rear drum brakes. Why am I not doing the drum brakes today? Because I can't stand drum brakes and I just want to get the front brakes done. Anyway, before we get going, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button, you'll get videos of what we're doing in the future. Let's get going with this now. Alright, so we've got the truck lifted up. It's on a jack stand. We've got stops in the back, so all the safety precautions have been taken. We've got the wheel off to save time because I think everybody here knows how to take a wheel off. And what we're doing is we're going to take the caliper off with a 17mm socket. So there's two bolts, and we're going to first just loosen them up. And the next thing we're going to do before we take the caliper off is loosen up the brake line. And this one uses a 12mm bolt. Now let me give you a better perspective of exactly what I'm doing here. So here's the caliper. We've loosened up the bolts behind the caliper, loosen up the brake line. I'm going to do one more thing, which is to take off the pads, pull the pads off. So before we go any further, I'm going to give everything just a quick spray of some brake cleaner. I've got a pan underneath because the dust that comes out of these things sometimes is pretty ugly. Since I'm replacing the rotors, I feel safe in doing this. If you're not replacing the rotors, I certainly don't recommend you do this, is to separate the pads to compress the pistons. Now, the 2018 Toyota and the newer Toyotas have 4 pistons, so we'll tackle that in a second. But if you notice, it's loose now. So the next thing I'm going to do is take the retainer clip off. Now the newer Toyota Tacomas have this long retainer clip. Kind of like the system. And we're going to reuse that eventually, or reuse the new clips. It doesn't really matter. I'm taking this retainer clip off, or actually taking the pin out. A little bit of rust here. And pulling these old pads out. These are the original Toyota ones because it's got that sleeve in the back. Now, I picked up a short rubber strap. Gonna hook it onto the spring, and while carefully holding the caliper, I'm going to take the caliper bolts out. Now, since I loosened this up, I can remove the caliper and just retain it to the side for a second. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and take the rotor off. And the reason I'm doing that, gives me more room to work with the caliper, which you'll see why in a second. So I've got 2 bolts, M8 by 1.25. 10 millimeter. And that'll push the rotor right off. Alright, so I've got the power stop rotors. The way they're packed, it looks like there's some sort of liquid inside to keep them from corroding, I suppose. And to play it safe, what I'll do is I'll give them a wipe down with a brake cleaner. We'll get these put on there. And they are marked. So one thing I wanted to point out is that they are marked front passenger. And the reason is because these are slotted. The drills, probably the direction of the drill marks as well. So you want to follow that if you were to get drilled and they're slotted rotors. And I'm just setting these hand tight just to get this in there to the point where the caliper will go on correctly. Now, here's the fun part. The caliper we need to compress those pistons. There's 4 pistons on this beast. So what I need to do is I'm going to start with a C-clamp. This is a 3-inch C-clamp that we have here. And I'm going to start with the inside. Actually, I'll start with the outside. Want to face the old pads in. Now, before you do this, one thing you do want to do, open up your hood, check your reservoir. You don't want it to overflow. This is a lot of brake fluid that's being displaced when we do this. And I want to get these in as far as reasonably possible, because the new brake pads obviously are going to take up a lot more room. Now, when I compress these, if I don't do something to hold this in place, these are going to pop back out. As a matter of fact, you can see one of these pop back out. So what I'm going to do is use one of these little husky, or 2 of these little husky clamps just to hold it in place. They don't have enough power to really clamp, or they might, but I just want to hold that in place while I do the inside pistons. Okay, so. Alright, so one thing you want to watch out for when you're doing this, when you're compressing one side, make sure the pistons don't go out too far on the other side, or they could come out of the bore. One way to do that is to, again, use a brake pad, an old brake pad. That way you don't contaminate it. And clamp it in place, or probably clamp it in place would be your best bet, but let's see if we can get this on here. This is definitely almost a 2-man job. Somebody to hold and somebody to compress. Here's a video shot of the 4-handed brake compression, or piston compression, which is crazy. This is why it pays to have a lift, I guess, but we don't have one, so we're doing this in the driveway. Well, I think that should get us where we need to be. Alright, so we got the pistons compressed after a great deal of aggravation. Alright, so what you just witnessed is probably the more difficult way of doing it, which we just did. There's an easier and more effective way of doing this. If you go back to 212 in the video timeline, when we separate the pads and just give the pistons a little bit of compression, at that point you should take off the brake line bracket as well as the 2 bolts holding the caliper on. Leave everything assembled because that will hold the old pads in place. And what you can do then is use 2 3-inch C-clamps and one on either side, and slowly compress the pistons on both sides, all 4 of them, if not simultaneously, pretty close, so that none of them stick out or bulge out or come out of socket. And that way you can get the pistons compressed very easily with the pads being held in place and not falling out. Once you've got that done, you take all the hardware off, take the old pads off, and you're ready to get going where we're at right now. All right, now it's time to put the caliper back on. Once you get one started, you can wiggle it back and forth and get them both started. So I'm going to snug them up, but I'm not going to tighten them just yet. Okay, the other thing I need to do is put the brake line back on.
There's a word for that, but I'm not going to say it. There's a word for it, but I'm not going to say it.
So, over-engineer?
Yeah, that's it.
That would be German.
Behind.
Oh, that's it. All right, I'm going to torque it down to 90 foot-pounds. All right, now it's time to put the brake pads in. So one thing about PowerStop is they give you a little packet of ceramic brake grease, which is really great. I like to grease the back of the pads as well as the caliper, the slide points. But what I'm going to do, flip these over. And by the way, I also keep a thing of Permatex, the caliper lube. It's synthetic. It works just as good, I think, as the ceramic stuff, but you don't get a whole lot here. I'll put some on the back of the pads to minimize any vibration caused squeals or noise. Not a lot. You really don't need a lot. Just the contact points for the pistons. Hit the slide points, which top and bottom. I'm going to lube up the slide pins while I'm here. Stuff actually feels more like glue than lubricant. But. Alright, I'm going to walk over to the caliper, and the slide points on the caliper, I'm going to put some lube on that as well. Now the interesting point, they actually show you where to grease on the packet, which is pretty interesting. I actually like the PowerStop product. They give you everything you need to do a good brake job. Alright, so before I go any further, I want to clean my hands up because I don't want to contaminate the brake pads. So I'll be right back. Pretty sure it moved. That was us checking. There was a little bit of rubbing noise, so we put some lug nuts on here, made sure it was secure and as far in as it could go, and then we tested. It's not rubbing. I just like to do that because if it rubs afterwards and you haven't done that, it's a mystery. Is it the pads rubbing, or is it some other critical component rubbing, which you wouldn't want, of course. So let me go get the pads and put them in. All right, so I've got the pad with the feeler. That one's going to go in the back. That's my preference. Snug. Other pad's going to go in the front. Now the OEM version of these has the spreader in the bottom, so I'm going to put 2 of these spreaders on there. You want to make sure this little tab is over the pad itself, and that'll give you a good spread. There you go. Now I'm going to reuse the old one. I like to have 2 of them. That's just preference. It's not a necessity. Let me just see where it lines up.
Needs to go in.
Yeah, just give us a tap right there.
Oop. Shit, probably too much. I can get it off. Yeah.
That's good. And the reason I like it's designed for 4 spreaders. They only put 1 on there, but I like the assurance that those pads are going to be spread apart as much as possible. So at this point, I'll put the keeper on here. This is the original keeper that Toyota used, which is kind of funky. Make sure that everything's pointed in the right direction. And then this just kind of slides in there, and that'll keep those pins in. So this is ready to go. There is a break-in procedure for these brakes. PowerStop gives you a very detailed procedure. 5 stops from 40 miles an hour to 10 without stopping to heat the brakes up. Those are hard stops, they call them, I think. Then there's intermediate stops from 35 to 5 miles an hour without stopping, and then you got to run the car for 5 minutes, let the brakes cool down. And this is to cure the resins. My understanding is the way these ship these pads is the resins are semi-cured, and the final cure is done when you break them in. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll come back in a few minutes, let you know how it does. All right, so we've got the brakes done. We've done the break-in procedure. Everything went as smooth as it could be. 5 power stops, 5 intermediate stops, then 5 minutes of constant cruising to cool the brakes down. And it stops like a charm. What can I say? Anyway, I hope this has been helpful to you. If it has, hit share and like, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.